Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch, your own personal sales maven, here to offer you tips, strategies, and techniques to master your sales conversation. Today is one of our Mastering Excellence series, and this comes from my background in neurolinguistic programming, where we learn that there is a structure to excellence. And when you can understand the structure of how someone is getting exceptional results in some area of their life or business, you can implement that structure into your own area of life and business and start to see similar results. So I'm very excited to share this episode with you today and welcome our guest is Jake Stahl. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Jake. He is a communication powerhouse and executive coach and is driven by a deep curiosity about human behavior. As the CEO of Orchestraight, he leads a pioneering platform that blends neurostrategy with cutting edge technology to revolutionize business development and sales strategies. With a background in psychology and a master practitioner certification in neurolinguistic programming, Jake crafts impactful courses and trains sales professionals worldwide. Through his adaptive conversational blueprint, he introduces the revolutionary 210 rule and has empowered over 10,000 individuals across 6 countries to reach their peak potential. Also celebrated for his captivating speaking style, Jake has enthralled audiences in 47 states and has been said to have the uncanny ability to craft the perfect conversation. Jake, welcome to the show.
Nikki, thanks for having me. This is such an honor. Thank you.
I am so delighted to get to have you on the podcast. We met recently through a mutual connection. I love that people reach out and say, "Hey, I think you should know this person." I love when people do that to me. And that's how we got connected.
Yeah, it was through another podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
Yeah,
former society member said, "Nikki, I think you need to know Jake." And I was like, "Okay, if I need to know him, then we need to get on a call."
and it's been great so far. I've loved our conversations.
Same. Especially having somebody with such an extensive background in neurolinguistic programming, in addition to all of your other amazing studies that you've done and what you bring to the table. I feel very inspired and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. But before we get into what we're going to talk about today, which, by the way, for the audience, is how to craft the perfect conversation. Because when you hear that in his bio, does that not pique your curiosity? I'm like, I'm so in, Jake. But tell us a little bit about your business. And if you want to talk specifically about Orchestrate, I am so intrigued by this and would love for you to share a little bit about it.
Thank you. Yeah, Nikki, I've been doing training for 30 years across multiple companies, and I started my own company 12 years ago, which was Jake Stahl Consulting. But I've always been mesmerized by the fact that we tend as humans to just speak first and then regroup and reevaluate what we said later. And it's not a criticism, it's how we're built. So the thing that sparked me was I hated the opening, "How are you?" It's almost meaningless conversation. It invokes conditioned responses, and the real conversation doesn't wind up happening till later. Being an entrepreneur, I know that 90% of businesses that start via entrepreneurship tend to fail in the first year. So I took my degree in psychology, the master's certification in neurolinguistic programming, and a huge background in social psychology. And I thought, why not build that into an AI that allows you to develop a value prop, an offering, create an email, marketing things, web pages that literally have the perfect conversation. It creates great hook points. It uses all the triggers that we all respond to. And so Orchestrate is literally that. It helps you build your business from scratch, or if you already have a business going, it helps you improve the communications you have with others.
I love this. Don't we all need a little bit of that in our life? For sure. So fun. Okay, well, let's dig in a little bit around this idea of how to craft the perfect conversation. And just for the audience too, to know, I don't tell my the people I'm interviewing, very rarely do they know ahead of time what we're going to really dig into in these conversations. So the idea around accessing Jake's, unconscious competence, the thing that is so easy for him is me asking him questions and having him come up with the answers right off the top of his head, because that's usually where the structure starts to reveal itself. So I just wanted to tell the audience that there is no prep here. Like, I really am asking you these questions. You didn't know what we were going to talk about, and yet you're so in, which I really appreciate about you.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question is, if I got to stand in for you for a day, so I get to step into your shoes and be you for the day, what do I have to do, or how do I have to think in order to show up and behave from this idea of wanting to craft the perfect conversation?
I would say the first thing is, Nikki, is be prepared to tuck your ego, put it under your desk, put it in a file cabinet, leave it in another room, and be prepared to listen from an objective point of view. And there's a lot of things, as you well know, in NLP that talk to us about active listening, how to get involved in the conversation. And it always struck me, people would say, you need to listen better. You need to communicate better. Do you have an instruction guide for that? How exactly does that work? So we often ask things of other people that are vague and have no clear direction. And that's how I came up with the 210 rule, actually, was to help guide people on how to actively listen, but do it without ego, without judgment. And honestly, Nikki, when you sit down at the beginning of the day, you and I both know we have personal stuff going on in the background. And that's not always the easiest frame of mind to get into.
Yeah, that's so true. I know in NLP they teach us about the 4 levels of listening, right? And where people are. And this idea of being in active listening can be a challenge, because that means, I love that you said check your ego and like tuck it away, because ego is the thing I think often that makes you want to do what's known as conversational listening, right? Somebody starts to say something and you're like on the schoolyard back in, 6th grade, where you're playing jump rope and you're just waiting for your chance to jump in.
Yeah.
Like you're listening just enough so that you can start talking and tell people what you know. So I love this idea of tuck your ego and really show up and active listen. Do you have some examples of what does that mean? Like, how do you actively listen after you tuck your ego?
One of the first things I tell clients and companies that I work with to do is, in the first anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes, do not talk about yourself, your product. Say the word I, me, mine, any personal pronoun, and use that time to really get to know what the person's about. Are they coming into this conversation hot? Are they having a rough day? Are they super knowledgeable? Are they a stand-in for somebody else? And the reason we tuck the ego away, Nikki, is because that's what we use to judge, right? We say, oh my God, they're just not as clear on communicating as I am. Or, oh, you're having a crappy day and I'm having a great one, so I'm going to talk from a happy point of view. So tucking the ego, that's the hardest part for most of my clients, because it's not something we normally do, right?
And especially, I think, in a sales conversation, because I think one of the mistakes people often make, or the misconception, is that sales is about convincing somebody that you are so great and that you've got the perfect solution for them. And I know I learned this in NLP too. Like, it's not about convincing anybody. Like, that's not my job in sales, is not to convince. My job is to understand. And you can only understand through listening and asking questions and paying attention to the other person. So love that you're saying this. This makes my heart happy.
I can even give you a great example.
Oh,
I recently was introduced to a prospect through another client of mine. And he said, give her a call. I think she may be interested. So I called her, and I would say out of the 30 minutes, I spoke maybe a minute and a half total. And when we got off the phone, I thought, I'm not sure if she's going to become a client or not. Within an hour, I got an email from her saying, it's not lost on me that all you did was listen. When can we get started? And I did nothing. I didn't sell anything. I didn't talk about me. I just let them go.
Which I don't know if you found this, but I find that most people rarely get the opportunity to have a conversation where it is about them. So when
Yes.
you are the person who helped facilitate that type of a conversation where they can talk about themselves and they can share what's important to them or what struggles they're having, it's like this idea of, I mean, I don't know, but there's times that go by that I think, I don't think I've actually told anybody anything about me in a very long time. And it's not because I'm trying to play my cards really close to my vest. It's because people don't ask. They don't
Yes.
listen.
Yep. I have this thought that people tend to talk because they want to fill space.
Mm,
And the reality is, you don't have to fill space because other people really want to fill it for you. So if you let them do the filling, think of how much you learn. And when I have a client who says, "Oh my God, Jake, I want to jump in. I want to jump in. I have a thought." Your thoughts don't matter. It's not about you. It's about that other person.
yeah.
So lock it down, get that ego out of the way, and join a conversation.
One of my best sales lessons, I learned this very early in my career. I was still in my early 20s, and I had this incredible sales mentor. His name was Russ Short. He has since passed, but he was my sales mentor for 20 years, and I'm so grateful to have known him. And he used to always say, silence is an advanced selling skill. And
That's
he
that's
taught me,
brilliant.
he taught me by telling me to stop talking one time in a very aggressive way. He was like, stop talking. You're selling past the close. You need to be quiet. And I was like, okay. It was one of the best lessons. And I still actually teach it today in some of my trainings around this idea of that you can actually stop talking mid sentence and the other person will pick up the conversation and start talking. You-
Absolutely.
If you think like, oh my gosh, I think I'm running on, you just press your lips together and wait and see what happens. Somebody's going to fill that silence. It doesn't have to be you.
Yeah, and the silence drives some people nuts. And Nikki, silence is a cultural thing. It's been found that European descent tends to take silence of 3 seconds before they get uncomfortable. And yet, when we look at our Asian counterparts, like in Japan and China, it's not unusual for them to have 6, 8, 10 seconds of silence. And it's not only respect, but it's acknowledging the other person. So even silence is cultural, which I find fascinating as all get out.
I love that you shared that too. Thank you for doing that. And that is so true. And it's a good reminder that when you're in a conversation with somebody that they may have some different kind of takes on things and specifically around silence about, waiting. I have somebody in my life right now who I've noticed has a very specific speech pattern and she's very thoughtful before she continues a thought. And sometimes I think, oh, she's waiting for me to say something. And then I'll start to say something. And then I'll realize I just stepped on her thought. I need to zip it and be quiet and wait and let her have her thought. Let the silence be there. And, hers is definitely more than 3 seconds. It's probably more like 10. Just wait and see what she says next.
It's brilliant what you just said, though. You looked for her speech pattern. And that's part of that first 3 to 5 minutes of listening. Find out their cadence. Find out when they do stop. Find out if they ask you questions. All of that is so valuable. And I can't get that by talking to you. I can get it by creating a gap, which is me and what I do, because that doesn't matter. And that gap is filled by you and what you do. And they've shown it scientifically that when you talk about yourself, you get a little endorphin rush, almost equivalent to eating a chocolate cupcake. It's that type of chemical response in your body talking about yourself.
Oh my gosh. How many cupcakes are we all consuming all day long? Just from that analogy. Oh, Jake, this is why I wanted to have you on the podcast because I love these little things that you're sharing. Thank you.
Sure.
Here's my next question for you. So, when we're thinking about crafting the perfect conversation, what are your goals?
Well, my goals in a conversation, I always like to set beforehand. So I think this is something a lot of people tend to neglect, and yet it's the most important part of that perfect conversation, right? So we need to future pace, and we need to look at the end and say, as a result of this conversation, I will be able to A, B, or C. So if I want somebody as a client, my goal at the end is to either create another touch point or to ask them for the business. But I know a lot of people who get onto a Zoom call right from another Zoom call. And I've even heard people say, what was this meeting about?
Oh,
So, and
I'm cringing at that.
well, this is the part that makes me cringe, Nikki, is somebody will spend an hour looking for a cat video they saw 3 years ago, and yet they won't take 2 minutes to prep for a call that they're going on next. That whole thing staggers me.
Oh, I just love that you brought this up too. I just had kind of 2 instances in the last 24 hours where I got on the call with somebody. It was scheduled, not even by me, by the way. And it was like they they had no idea really who I was or really even showed kind of interest in me. And both times I thought, why am I here? Like, why am I here? I'm not sure that just based on these first couple minutes and the way they're engaging with me, that it feels like I need to be here because it doesn't feel like they care if I'm here or not.
Well, just a helpful tidbit I give to my clients, and maybe this will be helpful to your audience, is we do back-to-back meetings all the time. And it's because in our calendar, we say, okay, I'm going to have a 60-minute meeting. Instead, set 55-minute meetings or set a 25-minute meeting instead of a half an hour. That way, if you go a minute over, you're still safe. But if not, you can have some caffeine, go pee, walk outside for a minute, let the dog out, whatever you need to do. But we're so conditioned to think a meeting's got to be 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Nobody ever thinks of the odd numbers, and yet they can be the savior to your sanity on a busy meeting day.
Yeah, I do that with my strategy sessions. They're 50 minutes specifically because I want that time to close the chapter that I just finished with somebody and be able to be fresh and the best version of myself for that next meeting. So if that means me thinking about what's the outcome, like what's the goal going into the meeting, and also, yeah, refreshing my water, using the restroom, just standing up from my chair sometimes, like that feels like, oh, some relief. And now here I am, I can be really present. So I love that you shared that too. Okay, so how do you know you're achieving your goals to craft the perfect conversation? What are the cues that let you know?
I think the virtual AI note takers did us the biggest favor in the world. And what they did was, while you're talking and you have the note taker running, many of them will give you how many monologues you've had and how much time you've talked. And it will give you updates as you're talking to people. If you are talking more than 20, 25% of the time, you need to reevaluate. And the talking you do, if that's grammatically correct, the talking you do doesn't always have to be selling yourself. It can be empathetic statements. It can be asking for reinforcement. It can be giving some well-deserved flattery or comments. So part of having the perfect conversation is knowing that perfection is derived from how happy the person you're talking to is. Because here's another psychological fact is, when we have a great conversation, you do not attribute how good you feel to the conversation. Mentally, you attribute that to me. So after a while, the conditioning is, when I talk to Jake, I feel good. So when Jake calls, you bet we're going to have a conversation. And the proof of that is, think of the last time your cell phone rang and a name popped up and you're like, I just don't have time for this person. And that's how strong the conditioning is it can not only make people want to talk to you or keep them from talking to you at all. And the beautiful thing is you are completely responsible for how they view you. And the less you talk and the more you let them go and then only offer things when they need it, the more they're going to like you.
This is so fantastic. So I just want to comment on a few things. I mean, I'm taking a ton of notes just hearing you, and I hope my listeners are as well. Uh, I do want to bring this back to like, don't gorge yourself on the chocolate cupcakes. Like, kind of as the overarching theme here. And that if you're talking more than 20 to 25%, you probably need to reevaluate what's going on in that conversation. And this idea of conditioning and attributing feelings to the person in how that conversation goes. And that you're responsible for how they view you. In NLP, there's the presupposition, the meaning of your communication is based on that response you get. And that I will say, and I don't know about for you, but in my studies, that was one of the things that people often really, really struggled with because they're like, well, I can't control how somebody feels. I'm not responsible for how they take what I say and blah, blah, blah. But there is some real freedom and also responsibility when you start to approach conversations of the meaning of my communication is based on the response I get. Now, I feel like you can say, what do I have control over? What are the things that I can do to influence this in the positive way or me like moving towards my outcome?
And you bring up a good point about controlling how somebody else feels. To the people who feel that they can't do that, try and experiment. When you get on the phone with somebody, if you yell at them, you're going to make them feel lousy. So you can control that. If you want to shake somebody's hand and you put your hand out, 95% of the time, they're going to shake your hand. I have a friend of mine who's a detective, and he said, if I think somebody's staring at me and I want to verify it, I yawn. If that person yawns back, I knew they were staring. So our ability to control people is limitless, but the ability to do it ethically and understand how you control somebody is really where the true line is drawn. And as NLP practitioners, we're always told that you use this for good only.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always, and I teach this too of like consumer protection for your own mind. Knowing these things helps you decide how much influence do you want somebody to have in a conversation with you as well when you're in the position of being the decision maker, your money's on the line. These things matter because you can be influenced. And when you understand your ability to influence, like always do it with a high level of integrity, because the worst thing is somebody leaving a conversation and feeling like, I feel totally manipulated and I feel like that was gross and I need to go take a shower. They're not going to take your call. You're not going to get their business. So all these things, they really do matter.
Yeah, they do.
Okay. So knowing all of this, what do you actually do to reach your goal of having the perfect conversation?
So let's break this down. I'm going to explain the 2-10 rule
Okay,
and how
please.
anybody can do this.
Okay.
So I don't know if they've ever studied it, but there's a rule of thumb that for every 10 minutes you talk, you generate 2 minutes worth of questions in the other person. It's just a rule of thumb. So you figure in a 60-minute presentation, you're generating approximately 12 minutes worth of questions. So many, many moons ago, when I was trying to teach people how to listen, I said, let's flip that on its head. So every 2 minutes, you check in. Hey, Nikki, does that make sense? Nikki, I'm not going too fast, am I? Nikki, have you ever experienced that? So every 2 minutes I do that. At the end of 10 minutes or 5 check-ins, I then level set. So Nikki, I have blathered for 10 minutes and I just want to make sure that I didn't lose you anywhere. So if I use that, I am always eliciting feedback from people. I am always getting them involved in the conversation. And while I do that in a presentation, if I am trying to promote my services, it is amazing how even the most introverted person will get involved because you're showing them all the flags and signals that you want to listen and you want them involved in the conversation. I worked with a company not long ago. I had the reps buy stopwatches. I said, I literally want you to watch this. Every 2 minutes and every 10 minutes, you're going to do this. And Nikki, you can do it from the listening side. So my wife's been in banking for, God, almost 30 years. And she'll sit down and she'll say, Jake, today I worked with audit and we did ACHs. And I'm like, did ACHs? Yeah, and this is what happened. So every 2 minutes, I check in with her while she's talking. She appreciates it. She feels listened to. And at the end of 10 minutes, I say, let me get this straight. And then I feed back what I've heard. If you can watch a clock, you can do the 2-10 rule.
So I want to comment for the listener here. This is so good. That there's a few things that I heard Jake talk about there when he's talking about this conversation with his wife. So every 2 minutes, he does what is in NLP known as backtracking. So you state back what the person's saying in the form of a question. So like ACHs, like, and he curls his voice up, right? So this is that backtrack. He's not really even like going into detail about his question. He's not having to explain his question. He's just asking the question that prompts her to keep going in the conversation. And then at that 10-minute mark, giving some feedback to make sure that you've understood it, which sends the message, I absolutely care about this relationship because I'm paying attention, I'm listening, and I'm giving you the opportunity to make any corrections about anything that I've taken away so far to make sure we're on the same page, which is a rapport deepening strategy, like to the nth level.
And Nikki, just to add into that a little bit.
Yeah, please.
That forces you to actively listen.
Yeah.
If you want to repeat something back at 2 minutes or at 10 minutes, you've got to be laser focused on what's taking place. And then if you see the law of reciprocation comes in. So my wife will say, wow, I told you about my day. Tell me about yours. So that reciprocity comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the key point. When she asks me, I know her attention and her curiosity is piqued. It's literally the best time for me to talk. So the 2-10 rule offers you a lot of options. It increases your likability factor. And honestly, again, who doesn't want to be listened to?
Yeah. So many good nuggets there that when they're asking you the question back, now their curiosity is piqued. So they're more engaged in the conversation, they're listening, and it gives you that opportunity to share at a time when they're open to hearing what it is that you have to share. And isn't that the best time? Love this. Okay. All right. So here's another question for you is when a conversation maybe isn't going as well as you want it to do or be the perfect conversation, what do you do to course correct?
Well, it depends on whether it's me or them that is causing this to go completely astray. If it's going completely astray because of them, in one of my interjection points, I'll say, can we backtrack? Can we take a look at what we started with? Because I think somewhere along the line, we might have gotten off topic. In the thousands of conversations I've had, I have never had anybody take offense. I have never had somebody say, well, weren't you listening? Because you're saying it so politely.
That's right.
Hey, just want to go back to something you said earlier. So I'm showing them listening, as well as the fact that I still want to stay on their topic. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. For me, it's a little bit, I don't know, sneakier. So if I feel like I'm getting off track, I will literally in the middle of a Zoom meeting say, can you give me a second? And I will go off camera and I will put myself on mute. If I'm in a live conversation, I will say, can you give me a second? And I'll walk into the other room, regroup, and then come back. Many people think that by stepping away from a conversation, you're being rude. when in reality, you're asking them permission. So you're giving them the ability to control your actions.
Mhm.
And then you're coming back in a better frame of mind. We think in a conversation we have to continually talk, but the reality is the control's in your hands. If I say to somebody, can you give me a minute? I've never had somebody say no. Go off mic, take a couple of deep breaths, regroup, then I come back into it fresh.
These are some fantastic ways to course correct. So I love like, if it's them, the thing that I want to comment to the listener that I'm hearing from a structure standpoint is notice that Jake isn't saying to them, like, we're off track. I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. He's actually asking, can we backtrack? So he's asking permission, getting this buy-in, and then we're in this together as a conversation. It's not you didn't get it, you don't understand what I said here. Like, it's showing such a deep respect for the other person. I have so much appreciation for that. And then this idea of when you feel like it's you that needs to be course correct, that you give yourself some time. I share with people, I don't know if you did this, you may or may not have in your NLP training, but one of the things we used to do at the start of every class, our teacher would have us have a juggling ball, and we would start with passing this juggling ball from one hand to the next. This is about balancing the brain, right? And then at some point we moved up to, we would have 3 juggling balls. If you could get to that point, I'll tell you, I really have all my years of studying. I can juggle 2 balls really well, 3, not so great. And then we learned how to juggle scarves. And the thing about juggling scarves is it teaches you that there's way more time than you think there is between things happening. So this idea of you knowing enough and having that confidence to give yourself that time doesn't mean that the conversation is done. Doesn't mean the person's going to be offended. You're just giving yourself that little bit of time that you need so your brain can regroup, that you can, course correct if you need to, and then come back from a more resilient standpoint. I think especially in sales, sometimes people think there's no time, but there's actually time. You just
Yeah,
have to build it in, and you do it by asking permission. Like you said, again, is like, is it okay? May I take a minute here? I need to just go off camera for a second or whatever. And who's going to say no to that? Of course, they're not going to
right.
say no to that.
Yeah. And I think giving somebody else control, you can do that in a bunch of scenarios. I have clients who have a really tough ego and they're like, I'm not going to apologize to anybody. And I say, think about the power of an apology. If I come into a meeting 30 seconds late, I'm like, God, I am so sorry that I came in late. I was very disrespectful. 100% of the time, they're like, oh my God, Jake, don't even worry about it. But I'm handing power to them
Yeah.
to forgive me, that's an unbelievable power to have,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm giving you that you're good to go thing. And so apologies are an amazing way to get off to a good start. Not a fake apology,
Right.
but if there's something you can apologize for, it's actually so powerful. And this is the checking the ego at the door again, right?
Yes. So important. Learning how to, I think, apologize is a skill set. And if you're not good at it, I do think it's something worth investing some time and energy to learning how to do better. I think
Yeah.
most of us could probably get better at it. I know for me, it's a work in progress, and it it is so difficult to be around somebody who won't acknowledge when they are out of line, or when you feel a little bit slighted by them or pinched by them in some way. And then what they say to you feels really off-putting. It's such a rapport breaker. So
Yeah.
again, just such a fantastic tip around acknowledging and doing it in a really respectful, kind way without, you don't need to get the whip out and, like, beat yourself to death. But at the same time, let them have the power to decide how they're going to take it from there, which most people will give grace.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever had somebody be upset about it. People are usually more than willing to do that. And again, it builds that trust factor. You trusted me enough to forgive you. And it sounds odd, But it is so true that just giving that little shift of power, even for a brief period of time, is a game changer. That's a trust builder that increases rapport and makes them like you more.
Yeah.
It's just incredible the power it has.
Yeah. So fantastic. Before we like wrap up this part of the interview, I'm curious to know, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet in regards to crafting the perfect conversation that you want to make sure that we get out into the world?
Yeah, I'd like to throw out there that a big part of having the perfect conversation is persuading someone. So that means, how do you affect their ability to like you and trust you before they even speak to you? And there's a lot of ways to do this, but I'll give your audience just a real simple one. When you take your headshot for LinkedIn or Zoom or whatever it is, make sure 3 components are in the headshot. First is a huge smile, not fake, crow's feet involved, and a big bonus for teeth. Second is either lean slightly forward or have good posture, indicating that even your picture is interested in what they have to say. But the third is the kicker: slight tilt to the head. Not huge, just a slight tilt. Psychologists believe that this goes back to evolution, that says, if I expose my jugular and carotid to you, I'm showing you trust. And so that typically invokes response trust. So this is just a great way to start to show people you're trustworthy and likable before you even say the first word to them.
Fantastic. This idea of your headshot and these 3 things that Jake just gave us. This huge smile, bonus for teeth. I love that so much. Leaning slightly forward and or having really good posture. And this idea of the slight tilt to the head. I've never heard anybody talk about this from a picture standpoint, and you've completely like opened my brain to this. I do think about this and I teach this in a conversation to invoke curiosity, that this is that you're curious and that you really are interested in the other person just by tilting your head a little bit. It shows that like I'm open and open to receiving feedback, but I've never thought about it from the picture standpoint. Like Jake, huge home run there. Thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Oh, I love it so much. Okay, so as we wrap up, I always like to do the little something extra. They call it the lamb yet section. And so my first question for you, Jake, is what is something that brings you pleasure and or joy right now?
I am fortunate enough to have a granddaughter, and she brings me an immense amount of joy. I am also still thrilled and enamored with my wife after 8 years, and I love every minute I get with her. So if I can do anything with my wife or I can see my granddaughter, those are 2 home runs for dopamine for me.
Yes. Can I ask how old the granddaughter is?
Yeah, she's 3. She's going to be 4 in July. But we just had dinner with them on Friday, and oh my God. She said, Papa, raised her arms and smiled to me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great.
It's melts your heart, right?
Oh, it
yeah.
does. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Okay, how about this? What's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
I am a licensed blackjack dealer.
Wow. I am
How's that?
surprised. That's a great one.
There was a 200-hour course on how to deal blackjack, and I've loved it. I don't deal, but I do enjoy playing blackjack, and it does, in my opinion, give you a slight advantage, just understanding what's taking place, the frequency of cards, etc.
That's so cool. I will say blackjack is hard for me. I feel like my brain needs a little bit more time to process, and blackjack's a little fast for my
It can
brain
be.
in those kind of situations. So either I need some serious training on it, not that I need to gamble, but I admire people who are good at blackjack, I will say. Okay.
I'm as good as the house lets me be. How's that for a statement?
There you go. I love that. What's something going on in your business right now that you're excited about?
I just launched Orchestraight. That just came out in October. That's my first official product launch, and the uptake has been good. We have companies that want to do it for their sales team. I have a wide variety of clients. I have everything from ghostwriters to insurance agents, real estate agents, and people who run a 25-person sales team.
And Orchestrate also works for people that are just starting. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, we
Just
market
starting in
this
your
very
business.
heavily to the fractional segment, the
Mhm.
people who are either A, doing fractional work for a company or are a solopreneur. Because the biggest problem I've always heard, Nikki, and I do speaking engagements on this all the time, is people will say, just left my job or I just got fired. I want to work for me. I formed my LLC. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
And Orchestrate literally takes you from that spot as far as you want it to take you. It can help you negotiate better. It can do a transcript analysis to give you a better idea of what next steps would be and the exact verbiage to use to appeal to their psychology. It's a really neat tool.
Yeah. So exciting. Now, how about for people listening that want to connect with you? What's the best way for them to do that?
The absolute best way is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I have a decent LinkedIn presence and I do read my DMs. So if somebody wants to reach out, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'd be more than happy to help. And if people want to try Orchestrate, if you would put the link in the call notes, anybody who comes in gets a 2-week free trial. So you can go in, give it a 2-week test run, see how you like it. And yeah.
Awesome. We will definitely put that in the show notes. And I encourage you guys to go try out Orchestrate. It's on my list of things to commit some time to checking out. I'm very intrigued by it. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And I'm so grateful to have had this conversation. And I learned so much. And I won't stop thinking about when I'm talking about myself, I'm gorging on chocolate cupcakes. Like, knock it off, Nikki. You don't need any more cupcakes.
Well, thank you for the honor of having me. I have a lot of respect for you and what you do as a podcaster, and even more so as a salesperson and NLP person. So it was a true blessing to talk with you today.
Thank you so much. And for you, the listener, I hope you got some really great takeaways from this. I know I have a ton of notes and I've had my eyes opened around some really powerful things from Jake's message. So if you're inclined, please share with us what was your biggest takeaway. Make sure you connect with Jake. Tell him what you loved about the podcast. If you want to share with me your biggest takeaway, I love to hear that. And if you found value in this particular episode, please share it with others so that they can get exposed and have a little Jake in their life as well. So thank you for listening. I am wishing you continued success in all you're doing. Have a great rest of your day.